The grand auditorium of the United States Naval Operations Command stood silent as a tomb. 600 officers sat in perfect formation, their white dress uniforms gleaming under the vaulted dome lights like rows of pristine marble statues. The air hung thick with the weight of ceremony, heavy with the scent of polished brass and barely contained pride. Photographers positioned themselves in shadowed corners, their lenses trained on the elevated stage where America's finest would be honored for extraordinary valor. At the front row, Admiral Marcus Caldwell sat with the rigid posture of a man who had spent 40 years in uniform. His chest bore an intimidating array of ribbons and medals, each one a chapter in a book written in blood and sand. Gulf War, Afghanistan, Somalia, dozens of classified operations that would never see the light of day. At 62, his hair had gone silver at the temples, but his eyes remained sharp as combat steel. He had seen heroes rise and fall. He had watched young warriors accept glory with tears streaming down their faces. He had pinned medals on the chests of men who would carry their scars to the grave. But today, his attention fixed on one name printed in the ceremony program. One name that had been whispered through Naval Special Warfare Command like a ghost story for the past 18 months. Lieutenant Reagan Ashford. The announcer's voice echoed across the auditorium, formal and practiced. For extraordinary heroism during combat operations in the Philippine theater, the Navy Cross is awarded to Lieutenant Reagan Marie Ashford, United States Navy SEALs. There was no roar of applause, no sudden eruption of pride, just a reverent hush as every head turned toward the third row. Reagan stood with mechanical precision, not the proud bearing of a decorated warrior savoring her moment, but the rigid movements of someone executing a drill under gunpoint. Her dress whites were immaculate, every crease sharp enough to draw blood, her ribbon bar perfectly aligned. Her face held no visible emotion, as if carved from the same cold marble as the statues that lined the hallway outside. She did not scan the crowd for familiar faces. She did not pause to absorb the magnitude of the moment. She simply marched forward, one foot after another, eyes locked on a point somewhere beyond the stage, beyond the walls, beyond this room entirely. Admiral Caldwell watched her climb the steps with mechanical grace. Something was wrong, profoundly wrong. He had been in enough award ceremonies to recognize the difference between humility and haunting. This woman was not humble. She was hollow. The announcer continued reading from the sanitized citation. Lieutenant Ashford demonstrated exceptional courage under fire during a classified hostage rescue operation in the southern Philippines. Despite sustaining critical injuries, she refused evacuation and single-handedly extracted 2 severely wounded teammates through hostile territory. Her actions directly resulted in the survival of multiple personnel and exemplify the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. The words floated through the air like smoke, carefully crafted to tell a story while revealing nothing. Caldwell had read the full after-action report, the classified version, and even that had been scrubbed cleaner than a crime scene. Reagan reached the stage and snapped to attention. Her salute was textbook perfect. Caldwell rose from his seat and approached, studying her face as he drew near. Her eyes were level, focused on nothing. Her jaw clenched so tight he could see the muscle jumping beneath her skin. But it was her posture that caught his attention. She stood straight, but favored her left side ever so slightly. Not enough for the cameras to notice, just enough for a man who had carried his own wounds for decades. He extended his hand. Her grip was firm, controlled, the handshake of someone who had practiced emotional suppression until it became muscle memory. "Congratulations, Lieutenant," Caldwell said quietly. His voice meant only for her. "Thank you, sir." Her voice was low, flat, completely devoid of inflection. He lifted the Navy Cross from its presentation case. The bronze medal caught the light, the ribbon's blue and white stripes pristine. For a fraction of a second, he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not pride, not relief, Something darker, something that looked almost like rage. Caldwell pinned the medal to her uniform with practiced efficiency. The audience rose to their feet, applause rolling through the auditorium in waves. Cameras flashed from every angle, capturing the moment for posterity, for the official record, for the story the Navy wanted to tell. Reagan Ashford stood motionless as a statue. No tears, no smile, just a single, barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement. "Well done, Lieutenant," Caldwell said, stepping back to salute. She returned the salute with mechanical precision, then turned and descended the steps. The applause continued, but she did not acknowledge it. She walked back to her seat as if nothing had occurred, as if she had simply retrieved a forgotten item rather than received the nation's second highest military honor. Caldwell returned to his seat, but his eyes never left her. Throughout the remainder of the ceremony, as other names were called and other medals presented, Reagan Ashford sat in perfect stillness. Officers approached her between presentations, offering handshakes and congratulations. She responded with polite, minimal words. Always standing alone, as if surrounded by an invisible perimeter no one dared cross. The Admiral had seen this before. Not often, but enough times to recognize it. This was not the demeanor of a hero basking in hard-earned recognition. This was the 1,000-yard stare of someone still trapped on the battlefield, unable to find their way home. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, mingling and exchanging stories, Reagan remained in her seat. Families embraced their decorated sons and daughters. Reporters circled like sharks, hungry for quotes and photo opportunities. But around Lieutenant Ashford, an empty circle persisted. Caldwell made his decision. He rose from his seat and moved against the flow of the dispersing crowd, making his way toward her. She stood as he approached, snapping to attention and rendering a crisp salute. "At ease, Lieutenant," he said, returning the gesture. "Walk with me." For a fraction of a second, something crossed her face. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same controlled neutrality. "Yes, sir." They walked together out of the auditorium and into the quiet corridor beyond. The walls were lined with portraits of fallen heroes, young faces frozen in time, their eyes following visitors with silent judgment. Reagan's gaze drifted across the photographs, studying each face with an intensity that made Caldwell's chest tighten. "You refused this medal once," he said, his voice even and conversational. Reagan stopped walking. "I did, sir. Why accept it now?" She did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on a particular photograph, a young SEAL who had died in Ramadi in 2006. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for her frame. "I thought no one cared enough to ask why I refused it, sir." Caldwell studied her profile. There was something in her tone, not rebellious, not bitter, just exhausted. The exhaustion of someone who had carried a crushing weight for so long, they had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "I read your file," he said carefully, "but I know how files can lie, or at least how they can omit." Reagan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They don't lie, sir. They just leave things out." "Like what?" She turned to face him fully. For the first time since he had seen her in the auditorium, something flickered behind her eyes. Not tears, something harder, something that looked like molten steel cooling into an unbreakable edge. "Like the truth, Admiral." Caldwell watched her closely, trying to read what the sanitized reports and official citations had failed to capture. "I authorized that mission," he said, "or at least I signed off on the operational plan. Intelligence indicated light resistance, quick insertion, extract the asset, exfiltrate, clean operation." Reagan's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted, a barely perceptible stiffening, as if she were bracing for impact. "You remember wrong, sir." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Caldwell's eyebrows rose slightly. "How so?" She held his gaze, and for a moment he saw past the controlled facade. Behind those eyes there was a fire burning, not the clean flame of righteous anger, but the smoldering embers of betrayal, left to burn slowly for months. We weren't sent to extract an asset, Admiral. We were sent into a trap. The corridor seemed to grow colder. Somewhere in the distance, voices echoed from the departing crowd, but they sounded 1,000 miles away. That's a serious allegation, Lieutenant. It's not an allegation, sir. It's a fact. Caldwell studied her face, searching for signs of paranoia or trauma-induced delusion. He found neither. What he saw instead was the cold certainty of someone who had stared at the evidence until it burned itself into their retinas. Explain. Reagan glanced over her shoulder, checking to ensure they were alone. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the intensity remained undiminished. The mission brief said we were extracting a CIA contractor kidnapped by Abu Sayyaf. Hostage rescue, time-sensitive, minimal resistance expected, standard operation. That's what the intelligence indicated. The intelligence was manufactured, sir. She took a breath, and Caldwell noticed the slight hitch in her chest, as if something physical prevented her from drawing a full lungful of air. The contractor was already dead, had been for 4 days before we hit the ground. Someone knew, someone sent us anyway. Caldwell felt the familiar cold weight settling into his stomach, the same feeling he had gotten in Afghanistan when an operation went sideways and the pieces did not add up, when the mission parameters did not match the reality on the ground. How do you know the timeline? Because I've seen the autopsy report, the one that was classified above our clearance level, the one that was backdated after the mission went wrong. You access classified material? Reagan's expression did not change. Yes, sir, I did. Court-martial me if you want. But I needed to know why 4 of my teammates died for nothing. The corridor fell silent except for the distant hum of ventilation systems. Caldwell weighed his options. This conversation had already crossed several lines. He could end it now, file a report, let the appropriate channels handle the situation through proper procedures. But something in Reagan Ashford's eyes stopped him. He had been in the service long enough to recognize the difference between a disgruntled sailor with a grudge and a warrior carrying an unbearable truth. Tell me what happened, he said quietly. Not the sanitized version, the real story. Reagan looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring whether he could be trusted with what she was about to reveal. Then she glanced down the corridor toward a security door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." If you really want to know why I didn't want the medal, Admiral, you need to see what it actually cost. She paused, her hand moving unconsciously to her left side, just below her ribcage. Not just in body, sir. In bone. In blood. Caldwell followed her gaze to the security door, then back to her face. Whatever she was about to show him, it would change something fundamental. He could feel it in his bones, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 4 decades of combat operations. Show me, he said. Reagan nodded once, then turned and walked toward the security door. She swiped her access card, and the lock disengaged with a metallic click. The door opened into a small briefing room, empty and sterile. White walls, a single table, 2 chairs, no windows, no surveillance cameras in sight. It was the kind of room where difficult conversations happen, where careers ended or began, where truth came out to breathe in the shadows. Reagan stepped inside, and Admiral Caldwell followed. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound. The small briefing room felt like a pressure chamber. Soundproofed walls seemed to absorb not just noise, but oxygen itself. Reagan Ashford stood at the far end, her back to the Admiral, hands resting on the edge of the metal table, as if she needed the support to remain upright. I haven't been in this room since my debrief, she said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that had not been there in the corridor. 18 months ago. They sat me here and asked 3 questions. Then they left. 1 week later, I got the Navy Cross recommendation in the mail. Caldwell remained standing near the door, giving her space. He recognized the signs. This was a woman on the edge of something, and pushing too hard would send her over. What were the three questions? He asked. How many survived? How many died? Did I see who fired the shot that killed our team leader? Reagan turned slowly, and for the first time Caldwell saw the full weight of what she carried etched into her face. They didn't ask how it happened. They didn't ask if the mission parameters were accurate. They didn't ask why our GPS coordinates led us directly into a pre-sighted kill zone. She took a breath, and again Caldwell noticed that slight hitch, that fractional pause as if her body refused to fully cooperate. They asked their questions, checked their boxes, and then they buried it. Turned it into a story about heroism under fire, about one woman who refused to leave her teammates behind. They made me into exactly what they needed me to be. And what was that? A hero, Reagan said, and the word tasted like poison in her mouth. Someone they could parade around to prove that women belong in combat roles. Someone whose story was clean enough for the press and complicated enough to stay classified. A perfect narrative. Caldwell moved further into the room, pulling out one of the chairs and sitting down. The gesture was deliberate, not confrontational, not rushed. Just a man settling in to listen. Tell me about the mission, from the beginning. Reagan remained standing, her posture still rigid despite the exhaustion bleeding through. May 15th, 2023, 0200 hours. Six-man team inserted via Mark V special operations craft off the coast of Mindanao. Objective: locate and extract CIA contractor Dr. Marcus Whitmore, kidnapped 72 hours prior by Abu Sayyaf militants. Her voice had shifted into the clinical tone of an after-action report, the emotional distance of someone reciting facts they had memorized to avoid feeling them. Team composition: Master Chief Wyatt Sullivan, team leader. Chief Petty Officer Brandon Garrett, assistant team leader and breacher. Petty Officer First Class Michael Hendricks, communications. Petty Officer Second Class Patrick Murphy, automatic weapons. Petty Officer Second Class Nathan Dalton, demolitions in close quarters combat. And myself, sniper and combat medic. She paused and Caldwell saw her hands tighten on the table edge. We were carrying standard loadout for a hostage rescue. I had my Barrett M82A1 for long-range overwatch, plus an M4A1 carbine as backup. Sullivan had an HK-416 with an M320 grenade launcher. Murphy carried the M249 SAW. Standard kit, standard procedures, everything by the book. What time did you hit the beach? 0300, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Reagan's eyes had gone distant, looking at something only she could see. The jungle was wrong from the start. Too quiet. I've done enough operations to know what normal sounds like. Birds, insects, the ambient noise of a living ecosystem. But that night, everything was silent, like the whole damn jungle was holding its breath. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. Did you report the anomaly? Sullivan did, called it in over encrypted comms. Command acknowledged and told us to proceed. Said indigenous forces had been active in the area and wildlife displacement was expected. But you didn't believe it. Reagan's jaw tightened. I'm a SEAL, sir. We follow orders. We trust the chain of command. We trust that the people sending us into harm's way have done their due diligence and wouldn't put us at unnecessary risk. The emphasis on the word unnecessary carried volumes of bitter understanding. I took overwatch position 400 yards north of the primary objective. Elevation advantage on a ridgeline overlooking the compound where the hostage was supposedly being held. Perfect sightlines, perfect firing solution, everything textbook. She pulled out the chair across from Caldwell and sat, but her posture remained rigid, as if relaxation would somehow betray the gravity of what she was saying. Through my scope, I could see the compound. Small structure, bamboo and corrugated metal, exactly matching the intelligence photos. The GPS beacon we were tracking showed the asset inside. Everything looked exactly like it was supposed to look. But when Sullivan's team moved in, I saw movement behind them. Not in front where the enemy should have been. Behind. In the exact spot we had just passed through. In the extraction point we were supposed to fall back to. Caldwell's expression darkened. An ambush. A perfect ambush, Reagan corrected. Pre-sighted fields of fire, interlocking kill zones, claymore mines positioned along every likely avenue of escape, and snipers, at least 3, maybe 4, positioned in hides that would have taken hours to prepare properly. She met Caldwell's eyes, and he saw the cold fury burning there. They knew we were coming, Admiral. They knew exactly when, exactly where, and exactly how we would approach. Our operations security was textbook. We ran proper counter-surveillance. We followed every protocol, but someone gave them our playbook. You tried to warn your team. Reagan's expression cracked for just a moment, a flash of pain breaking through the controlled facade. I screamed into my radio. Nothing. The frequency was jammed. Not white noise, not interference. Jammed. Someone was broadcasting on our exact encrypted channel with enough power to blank out everything within a 5-click radius. Caldwell absorbed this information with the grim understanding of someone who had seen similar betrayals play out before. What did you do? I broke protocol, Reagan said simply. I abandoned my overwatch position, left an $8,000 rifle lying in the dirt, ran down that ridge at a full sprint while the jungle exploded behind me. She closed her eyes, and Caldwell could see her reliving every step. The first explosion was an RPG, took Sullivan down. Shrapnel tore through his left thigh, severed the femoral artery. He was screaming. I could hear him over the gunfire. Hendricks caught a 3-round burst across his chest, dead before he hit the ground. Dalton tried to return fire, got hit by a claymore. Murphy was laying down suppressing fire with the SAW, but there were too many of them, too many angles. Her voice had gone flat again, but her hands trembled slightly. I reached Sullivan first, applied a tourniquet with one hand while returning fire with my M4. Garrett was trying to drag Murphy to cover when the second RPG hit. It was close, too close. The blast wave picked me up and slammed me into a tree. Reagan's hand moved unconsciously to her left side again, fingers pressing against her ribs through the dress uniform. I felt it, the moment the shrapnel went in, like someone had driven an ice pick through my chest. White-hot pain that made everything else go silent for a second. I thought I was going to pass out, thought I was done. But you didn't. No, sir, because Sullivan was bleeding out. Garrett had taken a round through his shoulder and couldn't use his right arm. Murphy's leg was shattered, and the enemy was closing in. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying the young woman across from him. How far did you carry them? Reagan met his eyes. 1.2 miles, through jungle terrain, while taking sporadic fire. Sullivan was unconscious. Garrett could barely walk. I had Murphy's M249 because he couldn't carry it, and someone had to lay down covering fire. That weapon weighs 40 pounds. 43 with a full belt, Reagan corrected, plus my own kit, plus helping Garrett stay on his feet, plus dragging Sullivan when Garrett couldn't help anymore. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. The shrapnel in my chest felt like it was tearing deeper with every step. Every breath was agony. I bit through my sleeve at one point to keep from screaming and giving away our position. My vision kept tunneling. I knew if I passed out, we were all dead. How did you make it to extraction? I didn't make it. I collapsed 50 yards short, face down in the mud, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I remember thinking, at least I got them close enough. At least someone might find them. Reagan's expression had gone completely blank now, as if she were reading from a script written by someone else. A Navy rescue team found us at dawn, medevaced all 3 of us. I woke up 4 days later in a hospital in Guam, tubes everywhere, couldn't feel my left side. A nurse told me I had internal bleeding, broken ribs, 2 fragments of 7.62 millimeter shrapnel embedded near my heart. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Near your heart? 3 millimeters from my left ventricle, sir. The doctor said removing them carried a 50% chance of cardiac tamponade, death on the operating table. They recommended leaving them in place. You agreed? I insisted, Reagan said, and now there was steel in her voice. Because I wanted to remember, every single day. I wanted to feel them there, pressing against my heart, reminding me that someone put them there. Someone sent us into that jungle, knowing we wouldn't all come back. She stood abruptly, and before Caldwell could process what was happening, she had unbuttoned her dress white jacket with swift, practiced movements. She let it fall across the back of her chair. You wanted to know why I didn't want the medal, Admiral? Her hands went to the buttons of her uniform shirt. Caldwell started to look away, but she stopped him with a gesture. Don't, sir. You need to see this. She unbuttoned the shirt halfway and pulled the fabric aside, revealing the white undershirt beneath. Then, with deliberate slowness, she lifted the undershirt just high enough to expose her left ribcage. Caldwell had seen combat wounds before. Bullet scars, shrapnel damage, burns from IEDs. But what Reagan revealed made him draw a sharp breath. The scar ran diagonally across her ribs, a vicious slash of discolored tissue that spoke of torn flesh in emergency battlefield medicine. But it was not the scar itself that commanded attention. It was the 2 distinct lumps visible beneath the skin, just below her ribcage. Hard, irregular, unmistakably foreign objects embedded in living tissue. 7.62 millimeter fragments from an M67 fragmentation grenade, Reagan said, her voice clinically detached. Standard U.S. military ordnance, one of ours. Fired by one of our support units that was supposed to be providing covering fire, but hit us instead because someone gave them the wrong coordinates. She lowered her shirt and began buttoning it back up with the same mechanical precision she had used to remove it. Blue on blue, they call it, friendly fire. But there was nothing friendly about it, Admiral, and nothing accidental. Someone wanted to make sure we didn't walk out of that jungle. Caldwell found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. Why didn't they remove the fragments later, once you were stable? They wanted to, Reagan said, shrugging back into her jacket. Recommended surgery twice, but like I said, 50% survival rate. And I realized something lying in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling those pieces of metal pressing against my heart with every breath. She met his eyes, and Caldwell saw something in them he recognized from his own mirror 40 years ago. The look of someone who had touched death and come back changed. I realized I didn't want them removed. I wanted to keep them. Because every time the barometric pressure drops and they ache, every time I take a deep breath and feel that sharp pain, every time I lie down to sleep and feel them pressing there, I remember. I remember Hendricks and Dalton and Murphy and Garrett. I remember that someone thought our lives were expendable. And I remember that I'm going to find out who. She finished buttoning her jacket, adjusted her ribbon bar with practiced precision, and stood at attention. So that's why I didn't want the medal, sir. Because it's a lie. A pretty story wrapped around a rotten truth. And I'm done pretending that what happened to us was heroism instead of what it really was. Which was? Murder, Reagan said simply. Premeditated, calculated, murder. The word hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Caldwell stood slowly, his mind racing through implications and protocols and the enormous weight of what he had just heard. You have evidence? Reagan reached into her inner jacket pocket and withdrew a small USB drive. She placed it on the table between them with a soft click. Mission logs, original timestamps versus the sanitized versions that went into the official record. Communications intercepts showing intelligence warnings about increased enemy activity in the target area. Warnings that came in 45 minutes before our insertion, and were deleted from the system. GPS coordinate data showing someone manually overrode our rally points, and the authorization code for every single one of those actions. Whose code? Captain Victor Brennan, Naval Special Warfare Command. The same officer who personally briefed our team 6 hours before we hit the water. The same officer who inspected our gear and had unsupervised access to our GPS units. Reagan's expression was carved from granite. The same officer who sent us to die and then recommended me for a Navy Cross to make sure the story stayed buried. Caldwell picked up the USB drive, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to carry such enormous consequences. Why didn't you report this through proper channels? Reagan's laugh was bitter and short. Because Captain Brennan has friends, Admiral. 3-star friends. People who made it very clear that questioning the official narrative would be bad for my health and my career. People who suggested that my PTSD might be affecting my judgment. People who made sure I understood that some truths are too inconvenient to acknowledge. She straightened her jacket one final time, every movement precise and controlled. So I waited. I kept my head down. I accepted the medal I didn't want because refusing it twice would have raised too many questions. And I waited for the right person to come along. Someone with enough rank to actually do something. Someone with enough integrity to care. Caldwell looked at the young woman standing before him, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not a victim, not a damaged soldier struggling with trauma, but a warrior who had turned her pain into a weapon and waited patiently for the right moment to strike. You're looking at him, Lieutenant, he said quietly. But if we're going to do this, we do it right. By the book, following every regulation and protocol. Reagan's expression did not change. The book got my teammates killed, sir. Then we'll write a new one, Caldwell said, pocketing the USB drive. But we do it smart, methodical, with evidence that can't be disputed and procedures that can't be challenged. Can you give me that? For a long moment, Reagan said nothing. Then slowly, she nodded. Yes, sir, but on one condition. Name it. When this is over, when Brennan and whoever else is involved answers for what they did, I want to be the one standing there. I want them to see my face. I want them to know that the woman they tried to bury is the one who brought them down. Caldwell extended his hand. You have my word, Lieutenant. Reagan shook it, her grip firm and steady. Then let's get to work, Admiral. The morning sun cut through the windows of Admiral Caldwell's private office 3 days later, like a blade, illuminating dust motes that drifted through the air with lazy indifference. The room smelled of old leather and coffee, the accumulated scent of 4 decades spent in service. Caldwell sat behind his desk, the USB drive Reagan Ashford had given him connected to his personal laptop, the kind not connected to any network, the kind that could not be remotely accessed or monitored. He had been reading for 3 hours. The files were meticulous. Reagan had not simply collected evidence. She had built a case with the precision of a sniper lining up a kill shot. Every document cross-referenced, every timestamp verified against multiple sources, every discrepancy highlighted and annotated with the kind of attention to detail that separated good operators from legendary ones. The mission logs told a story that made Caldwell's blood run cold. At 19:15 hours on May 14th, 2023, a SIGINT intercept had flagged unusual radio chatter in the target area. Abu Sayyaf militants discussing American forces, specific references to the rescue team and tomorrow night. The intelligence had been flagged as priority, routed directly to Naval Special Warfare Command, and received by the Operations Center at 19:42 hours. 45 minutes before Reagan's team had left for their final briefing. 2 hours and 18 minutes before they had boarded the Mark V Special Operations craft. 7 hours and 15 minutes before they had hit the beach. Someone had received that intelligence. Someone had read it. And someone had deleted it from the operational database at 20:06 hours, replacing it with a sanitized report indicating light enemy presence and minimal threat assessment. The deletion had required command-level authorization. The digital signature was clear and unambiguous. Captain Victor Brennan. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, the old leather creaking beneath his weight. He opened another file. GPS coordinate data from the mission. Reagan had somehow obtained the raw telemetry from the team's personal navigation units. The data showed something that should have been impossible. At 2300 hours on May 14th, someone had remotely accessed all 6 GPS units and modified the preset rally point coordinates. The new coordinates placed the rally point in a clearing surrounded by elevated terrain on 3 sides. Perfect ambush geography. A kill box any competent enemy force would recognize immediately. The access logs showed the modification had been made from a terminal inside Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters. The user authentication was, once again, Captain Victor Brennan. But it was the third set of files that transformed suspicion into certainty. Financial records. Reagan had accessed Brennan's banking information through methods Caldwell did not want to contemplate. The deposits were there in black and white. 18 payments over 3 years, each carefully structured to remain below reporting thresholds, totaling $1.8 million. Payments originating from a consulting firm called Meridian Strategic Solutions. Caldwell ran a basic search. Meridian Strategic Solutions was a wholly owned subsidiary of Orion Defense Systems. He sat back processing the implications. Orion was one of the largest defense contractors in the nation, specializing in advanced weapon systems and artificial intelligence applications for military use. They had been pushing hard for contracts involving autonomous targeting systems, drone warfare platforms, and predictive combat algorithms. Systems that required real-world combat data to function. Data that could not be simulated or approximated. Data that required actual human operators in actual combat situations, making actual life-and-death decisions under actual enemy fire. His desk phone rang, interrupting his analysis. The base operator. Admiral Caldwell, you have a visitor at the main gate. Dr. Rachel Thornton from the Inspector General's office. She says it's urgent. Caldwell straightened. Send her up. 20 minutes later, Dr. Thornton sat across from his desk. She was in her early 40s, with sharp intelligence that showed in her eyes before she spoke a word. She wore a conservative suit, carried a briefcase, and moved with economical efficiency. Admiral, thank you for seeing me on short notice. Dr. Thornton, what can I do for you? I've been conducting a routine audit of special operations casualties over the past 5 years, looking for patterns, anomalies, statistical outliers that might indicate systemic problems. She leaned forward slightly. I found 3 operations over 7 years with remarkably similar profiles: small team insertions, hostage rescue, or high-value target extraction, all in Southeast Asia, all involving teams from Naval Special Warfare Command, and all resulting in catastrophic casualties, despite intelligence assessments indicating minimal resistance. Caldwell kept his expression neutral. Combat is unpredictable. It is, Thornton agreed, but mathematics is not. The probability of 3 separate operations with nearly identical parameters, all resulting in ambush-level casualties, approaches statistical impossibility. Unless there's a common variable. What variable? Captain Victor Brennan. He was either the approving authority or directly involved in mission planning for all 3 operations. 14 men died across those missions, Admiral. Caldwell studied the woman across from him. What does your audit recommend? That's where things get complicated. I submitted my preliminary findings to the IG 3 weeks ago, requested authorization to conduct interviews and access additional classified materials. My request was denied, not delayed, denied, with a notation that the matter had been reviewed and found to be without merit. Who signed the denial? Admiral Howard Preston. But when I called his office to discuss it, His aide told me Admiral Preston had never seen my request, that it had been handled at a lower level and his signature applied administratively. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Preston was a 3-star, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, Brennan's direct superior. Did you pursue it? I tried, got stonewalled at every turn. Then yesterday I received a visit from 2 men in expensive suits who suggested that my audit might be creating unnecessary friction, that my career prospects might benefit from focusing on other areas. They threatened you. The implication was clear enough. Thornton opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder. So I decided to come to you. Because according to my research, you're one of the few flag officers in this building with enough seniority to actually do something. And because your service record suggests you might actually give a damn. Caldwell took the folder. Inside were casualty reports, mission summaries, and financial documentation that mirrored what Reagan had given him. Thornton had been building the same case from a different direction. What do you want from me, Dr. Thornton? I want you to open an official investigation, one that can't be buried or stonewalled, one with enough visibility that making it disappear would create more problems than letting it proceed. Caldwell set the folder on his desk. I'll need time. This has to be done correctly or it won't stick. How much time? A week, maybe 2. Thornton nodded. I can give you 2 weeks. After that, I'm going outside the chain of command. Understood. In the meantime, be careful. They're already watching, Admiral. The question is whether you're willing to do something about it. After Thornton left, Caldwell sat alone as evening shadows stretched across the floor. He reached for his secure phone and dialed a number he had not used in 5 years. The voice that answered was rough as gravel. Caldwell, didn't expect to hear from you again. I need a favor, Frank. Deep background on a defense contractor. Orion Defense Systems. A long pause. That's a big company to go poking around, Marcus. I know. How deep you want me to dig? Foundation level. I want to know who they pay, what they're building, and if they have any programs that require live combat data. The silence stretched. When Frank spoke again, his voice had lost its casual tone. You're playing with fire, Marcus. I'm aware. Give me 72 hours. 3 days later, Frank's research filled Caldwell's screen. Orion had 17 active military contracts totaling $4.3 billion. Their primary focus was autonomous weapons systems, with emphasis on AI-driven targeting and tactical decision-making platforms. They had submitted 6 proposals requiring real-world combat validation. All 6 had been rejected on ethical grounds. But one program had continued despite official rejection. Project Lighthouse, a tactical AI system designed to predict enemy movements and optimize friendly force deployment. The program required extensive data sets of actual combat scenarios. According to Frank's research, Project Lighthouse had received black budget funding through a classified congressional appropriation. The funding had been championed by Senator Richard Holloway, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator Holloway's largest campaign contributor was Orion Defense Systems. Caldwell encrypted the files and locked them in his safe. Then he made another call. Rear Admiral Jennifer Hayes, NCIS. Jennifer, I need a favor. The kind that stays off the books until it can't anymore. A pause. How off the books? Deep. Involves a sitting captain, possibly a 3-star admiral, and a defense contractor with billions in active contracts. Jesus, Marcus, send me what you have. Encrypted. That evening, Caldwell's secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Parking garage, level 3, 30 minutes, come alone. Caldwell retrieved his service pistol, checked the magazine, and slipped it into his shoulder holster. Then he left. The parking garage was nearly empty. A single car waited in the far corner. As he approached, the passenger door opened. Reagan Ashford sat behind the wheel in civilian clothes. Get in, sir. Caldwell slid into the passenger seat. This is beginning to feel like a spy novel, Lieutenant. It's about to feel a lot more like one. Reagan handed him a tablet displaying a photograph of Captain Brennan standing next to their team's equipment the night before the mission. Sergeant Colton Graves took this on his phone. Look at what Brennan's doing. Caldwell zoomed in. Brennan's hands were on one of the GPS units, but he was not inspecting it. He was manipulating it, entering data. Graves said Brennan was alone with the equipment for about 10 minutes, said he had classified updates to input. This proves access but not intent. Keep scrolling. The next image showed Brennan with two civilians. The timestamp indicated 6 weeks before the mission. That's Dr. Marcus Whitmore, the hostage we were supposedly rescuing. Reagan pointed to Whitmore. Brennan knew the asset before the mission. Caldwell felt ice form in his chest. Brennan knew the asset was working for Orion Defense Systems. Whitmore wasn't a CIA contractor. He was an Orion engineer developing combat AI algorithms, and he died 3 days before our mission. Then why were you sent to extract him? Because his body was carrying a GPS beacon, and because Orion needed combat data. They needed to test whether their algorithms could accurately model a SEAL team response to an ambush scenario. Reagan's voice was flat. We were never supposed to extract anyone, Admiral. We were the experiment. Caldwell stared at the photograph. You can prove this? I can prove Brennan knew Whitmore. I can prove Whitmore was already dead. I can prove someone manipulated our GPS coordinates and deleted intelligence warnings. What I can't prove yet is the direct connection between Brennan and Orion's research programs. I might be able to help with that. I have someone digging into Orion's background. Reagan nodded. In the meantime, we have another problem. Brennan knows someone's investigating. Yesterday, he scheduled an emergency readiness evaluation for next week, mandatory for all active duty NSW personnel, including me. He's trying to discredit you. That's what I thought too, until I saw the evaluation protocol. Full combat requalification, rifle marksmanship at 600 yards, close quarters battle drills, 4-mile run in full kit, everything designed to test whether someone with my injuries can still perform. Caldwell frowned. That's not standard. No, sir, it's designed to break me, to prove I'm damaged goods. Can you pass it? Reagan smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. I'm going to do better than pass it, Admiral. I'm going to set records. I'm going to make damn sure that every SEAL on that base sees exactly what a woman with shrapnel in her chest can do. The day of the evaluation arrived with crisp morning air and perfect visibility. Reagan stood at the edge of the rifle range at 0530, watching dawn paint the target berms in amber and gold. The shrapnel in her chest ached with the morning chill, a dull throb that had become as familiar as her heartbeat. Behind her, the training facility came to life. Personnel arriving for the mandatory readiness evaluation. Officers gathering to watch what everyone knew was theater disguised as assessment. Admiral Caldwell approached from the observation building. He stopped beside her. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, sir, I do. There are other ways to fight this battle. Reagan turned to look at him. With respect, Admiral, this stopped being about what I need to prove the moment Captain Brennan made it public. He wanted to break me in front of witnesses, so I'm going to show him exactly what a woman with shrapnel in her chest can do. The range officer called out, Lieutenant Ashford, you're up for rifle qualification. Reagan walked to the firing line where an M110 semi-automatic sniper system lay waiting. She picked up the rifle, worked the bolt, and loaded a 10-round magazine. Captain Victor Brennan emerged from the observation building, flanked by 2 officers. He walked with confident stride, his uniform impeccable. Reagan met his eyes across 50 yards. She smiled, not warm, the smile of a sniper who had just acquired her target. The range officer's voice cut through the air. Standard qualification course, 10 rounds, 600 yards, Cold bore conditions. Wind 15 miles per hour southwest. You may commence when ready. Reagan settled into prone position, feeling the familiar geometry of bones and muscles aligning. Her left side protested, the shrapnel sending sharp fingers of pain through her ribcage. She breathed through it, using the pain as an anchor. Through the scope, the target appeared crisp and clear. She adjusted for wind and dropping barometric pressure. She fired. The rifle bucked. Through the scope, she watched the round impact center mass. Perfect placement. She cycled the bolt and fired again. Another center mass hit. She fell into rhythm. Acquire, breathe, squeeze, follow through. Each shot a meditation. Each impact a prayer for teammates who could not stand beside her. 10 rounds, 10 perfect hits. Every shot within the kill zone. The range officer's voice carried genuine surprise. Cease fire. Score is perfect. 10 out of 10 center mass hits. Course record for this range. Reagan stood, feeling the protest in her ribs. She safed the rifle and turned to face Captain Brennan. His expression had shifted. The confidence was still there, but underlaid with uncertainty. Well done, Lieutenant, he said. Excellent shooting. Thank you, sir. Of course, marksmanship is only one component. Shall we proceed to the next evaluation? Reagan nodded. Ready when you are, Captain. The close quarters battle house loomed ahead. Reagan stood at the entrance, her Sig Sauer M17 loaded and holstered. The range officer checked his stopwatch. 12 hostile targets, 4 civilian targets. Any civilian casualties result in automatic failure. Time to beat is 22.3 seconds. You may begin on your signal. Reagan drew her pistol and centered herself. The pain in her chest was a steady throb now. She breathed into it. Ready. The buzzer sounded. Reagan exploded through the door, her body moving with fluid violence. First room, 2 targets. Hostile left, hostile right. 2 shots, 2 hits. She pivoted through the doorway. Another hostile at 10 yards. Single shot to the head. Down. She flowed through the structure like water, her pistol an extension of her will. 4th target at close range, intermingled with civilian. She fired past the civilian's shoulder, hitting the hostile in the throat. 5th target in stairwell, center mass hit. 2nd floor was more complex, tighter angles. A civilian emerged from a doorway and she held fire, pivoting past to engage a hostile behind. 2 shots, both hits. Another room, 3 targets, 2 hostile, 1 civilian. She engaged left to right. The hostiles dropped. The civilian remained standing. She cleared the final room and exited, her pistol still up and ready. The range officer stared at his stopwatch. Cease fire, clear, and show safe. Reagan ejected her magazine, locked the slide back, and holstered. Time is 18.7 seconds. All 12 hostile targets engaged. 0 civilian casualties. New course record by 3.6 seconds. The assembled crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Reagan stood motionless, breathing steady despite exertion. The shrapnel protested every heartbeat, but she was still standing. Captain Brennan stepped forward. Impressive shooting, Lieutenant. He paused. However, marksmanship and shooting are cognitive skills. The final evaluation will test whether your injuries have compromised your physical conditioning. Reagan met his eyes. I'm ready whenever you are, sir. The 4-mile run course stretched across the facility like a serpent. Reagan stood at the starting line in full combat kit. 45 pounds distributed across her frame. The weight pressed against her chest, where the shrapnel sat like unwelcome passengers. Admiral Caldwell watched from the observation point, flanked by Dr. Thornton and Master Chief Sullivan. All 3 wore expressions of barely contained tension. The starting officer raised his hand. 4-mile run in full kit. Standard time is 36 minutes. Anything under 32 is exceptional. Ready? Reagan nodded. The pain in her chest had evolved from dull ache to something sharper. This was going to hurt. Good. Let it hurt. Pain meant she was alive. The starting gun fired. Reagan launched forward, settling into a pace she knew she could maintain. Around her, other runners spread out. The first mile was deceptive, flat terrain. Reagan kept her breathing controlled, her stride even. The shrapnel protested with every footfall. She embraced the pain, used it as a metronome. Left foot, right foot, pain, breathe. Mile 2 brought the first hill. Reagan attacked it with controlled aggression, leaning into the slope. Two runners who had started ahead began to fade. She passed them without acknowledgement. At the top, her chest felt like railroad spikes were being driven through it. She gasped in air that seemed insufficient. Then she remembered Hendricks dying in the mud, Dalton torn apart, Murphy screaming, Garrett taking the round meant for her. She remembered carrying them, 1.2 miles through hell, while bleeding out. 4 miles was nothing compared to that. She crested the hill and accelerated down the far side. Mile 3, Mile 4. She could see people lining the course now, watching, waiting. Captain Brennan stood at the finish, stopwatch in hand. Reagan fixed her eyes on him and ran harder. The shrapnel screamed. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt like concrete. None of it mattered. She hit the finish at full sprint, crossing the line before her legs gave out. She stumbled forward, catching herself on her knees, gasping, alive. The timer showed 28 minutes and 14 seconds. The applause was genuine, spontaneous recognition. Reagan remained on her knees, unable to stand yet. Master Chief Sullivan was first to reach her, dropping beside her. "Easy, Lieutenant, you did it." "Time?" 28:14. "You destroyed the standard." Reagan looked up at Brennan, who stood frozen with stopwatch in hand. His expression had shifted past uncertainty into something like fear. Sullivan helped Reagan to her feet. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself upright. To meet Brennan's eyes, to let him see she was still standing. "Well done, Lieutenant," Brennan said, his voice carrying desperation. "You've exceeded all expectations. Clearly your injuries have not compromised your operational capabilities." "No, sir, they haven't." "Then I see no reason to continue questioning your fitness for duty." "That's generous of you, Captain," Caldwell said, his voice carrying an undercurrent that made officers look up. "Given that this evaluation was never about fitness for duty at all." Brennan's expression hardened. "I'm not sure what you mean, Admiral." "I mean, this was designed to discredit Lieutenant Ashford, to create a public record of failure." Caldwell stepped closer. "But she didn't fail. She succeeded beyond any reasonable standard, which means we can have the conversation you've been trying to avoid." "I don't know what conversation you're referring to." "Then let me clarify." Caldwell gestured toward the administrative building. "My office, 1 hour. You, me, Lieutenant Ashford, and a representative from NCIS. We're going to discuss a mission in the Philippines. We're going to discuss Orion Defense Systems. And we're going to discuss why 14 Navy SEALs have died over the past 7 years in missions you were involved in planning." The color drained from Brennan's face. The assembled crowd had gone silent. "That's a serious allegation, Admiral." "It's not an allegation, Captain. It's a statement of fact, and you're going to answer for it." Caldwell turned to Reagan. "Lieutenant, get cleaned up. Meet me at my office in 55 minutes. "Yes, sir." 55 minutes later, Reagan stood outside Caldwell's office in fresh fatigues. Master Chief Sullivan stood beside her, having insisted on being present as witness. The door opened. Caldwell gestured them inside. The office was crowded. Dr. Rachel Thornton sat with a recording device on the desk. A man in a suit occupied another chair, NCIS or FBI, and Captain Victor Brennan sat in the remaining chair, his uniform crisp, his expression controlled but tense. Caldwell closed the door. "Thank you all for coming. Captain Brennan, you're here voluntarily to answer questions regarding several operations. You have the right to legal counsel. Do you wish to invoke that right?" Brennan's jaw tightened. "That won't be necessary, Admiral. I have nothing to hide." "Good. Let's start with Operation Crimson Echo. May 15th, 2023. Can you describe your role? I was the approving authority. Standard hostage rescue. Intelligence indicated minimal resistance and high probability of success. And where did that intelligence come from? Multiple sources. SIGINT, HUMINT, satellite imagery, all analyzed and assessed as reliable. Caldwell opened a folder and slid a document across. This is a SIGINT intercept from 1915 hours on May 14th. It indicates enemy forces discussing an imminent American operation. This was flagged as priority and routed to your operations center at 1942 hours. Can you explain why it was deleted 24 minutes later? Brennan barely glanced at it. I don't recall that specific intercept. We receive hundreds of reports daily. This one was actionable, Captain. It specifically mentioned a rescue team. Caldwell slid another document forward. This is the deletion log, your authorization code, your terminal. Authorization codes can be compromised. True. Caldwell slid a third document. This is GPS telemetry data. It shows remote access at 2300 hours, modified coordinates that place the rally point in a textbook ambush position. Same code, same terminal. Brennan's expression remained controlled. I modified waypoints based on updated intelligence, standard procedure. Updated intelligence that contradicted the warning you deleted 2 hours earlier. I made a judgment call. Dr. Thornton leaned forward. Captain Brennan, can you explain why 3 other operations you were involved with showed similar patterns? Intelligence deleted, GPS modified, missions that resulted in catastrophic casualties. Combat is unpredictable. 14 men died across those operations, Captain. The statistical probability of that occurring by chance is less than 0.01%. The man in the suit spoke. Captain Brennan, I'm Special Agent Marcus Webb, NCIS. I need to ask about your relationship with Orion Defense Systems. Brennan's expression flickered. I have no relationship with Orion. Really? Webb opened a folder. Bank records show 18 deposits to your accounts over 3 years, totaling $1.8 million, all from Meridian Strategic Solutions, a subsidiary of Orion Defense Systems. Those were consulting fees, perfectly legal. Consulting on what? Operational planning, tactical assessments. Did this work include providing Orion with real-time combat data from active SEAL operations? The question hung like a blade. Brennan's face paled. I have no idea what you're talking about. Webb slid a photograph across. This is you having dinner with Dr. Marcus Whitmore 6 weeks before Operation Crimson Echo. Dr. Whitmore was the supposed hostage. He was also lead engineer on Orion's Project Lighthouse tactical AI system. I met with Dr. Whitmore on official business. Dr. Whitmore was killed 3 days before the operation, executed by Abu Sayyaf after Orion refused ransom. His body was left with an active GPS beacon that became the target. Webb leaned forward. You sent that team to extract a dead man, Captain. Why? Brennan said nothing. Caldwell stood. Captain Brennan, those operations weren't missions. They were experiments. You were feeding SEAL teams into engineered scenarios to collect combat data for Orion's AI systems. You were using American lives as test subjects for corporate profit. That's absurd. Is it? Caldwell opened another thick folder. Project Lighthouse required real-world combat data, data that couldn't be simulated. Orion submitted 6 proposals for live testing, all rejected on ethical grounds. So they found another way. They found you. Brennan's hands trembled. You can't prove this. We can, Reagan said. Every eye turned to her. Because I've spent 18 months collecting every piece of evidence, every transaction, every deleted report, every modified coordinate, every email and phone call. It's all there, Captain. She walked to the desk, pulling a USB drive from her pocket and placing it in front of Brennan. That contains recordings from the night you inspected our gear. Sergeant Graves filmed you on his phone. If you watch closely, you can see exactly what you were doing. You weren't inspecting our GPS units, you were programming them, entering the coordinates that led us into that ambush. Brennan stared at the drive as if it were a live grenade. You killed 4 of my teammates, Reagan continued, her voice absolutely level. You sent us into a trap knowing we probably wouldn't survive. And when 2 of us did, you tried to bury it. She leaned down, bringing her face level with his. But I asked anyway, and I found the answers. And now you're going to pay. Brennan's composure cracked. His hands shook. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I want a lawyer, he said quietly. Smart choice, Webb said, standing. Captain Victor Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, falsification of official records, accepting bribes, and providing classified information to unauthorized parties. As Webb read Miranda rights, 2 NCIS agents entered and placed handcuffs on Brennan's wrists. The captain's face had gone ashen. Reagan watched him being led toward the door. As he passed, he looked at her with something that might have been regret. They died for nothing, she said softly. Hendricks, Dalton, Murphy, Garrett, they died so you could get rich. I hope that thought keeps you awake every night for the rest of your life. Brennan said nothing. The agents let him out. The door closed with finality. Reagan remained standing, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her hollow. Her legs trembled. The shrapnel sent sharp pulses with every heartbeat. Caldwell placed a hand on her shoulder. Well done, Lieutenant. You got him. Reagan nodded, not trusting her voice. This isn't over, Thornton said. Brennan's arrest will trigger a broader investigation. Orion, Admiral Preston, anyone else involved. It's going to get messy. Let it, Reagan said. Let it all come out. Let the whole system know what happens when you treat warriors like expendable assets. Sullivan stepped forward. What happens now? Now, Caldwell returned to his desk. Now we start the real work. Congressional hearings, media scrutiny, complete audit of every operation Brennan touched. It's going to take months, maybe years. But we won, Reagan said. You won, Caldwell agreed. You took on a corrupt system, and you won. The months that followed proved Thornton correct. The investigation expanded like ripples from a stone. Brennan cooperated, providing testimony that implicated 3 other officers and 2 Orion executives. Admiral Preston retired under pressure. Orion lost contracts. Its stock collapsed. Board members scattered. Project Lighthouse was declassified and shut down. Congress held hearings. Senators gave speeches. The media ran stories. Families filed lawsuits. And through it all, Reagan Ashford continued to serve. She was promoted to lieutenant commander in a ceremony that felt genuine. She accepted with quiet dignity, knowing rank was not the prize. Justice was. She was assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command's Training Division, the youngest instructor in SEAL history. Her job was to teach the next generation about ethics, leadership, and responsibility. On her first day, standing before a class of new candidates, she unbuttoned her jacket and lifted her shirt to reveal the scars. These are from 7.62 millimeter shrapnel, she said calmly, still embedded near my heart. I carry them every day. They hurt when weather changes. They remind me of 4 teammates who died in an ambush they should never have walked into. The class sat in absolute silence. I show you this not for sympathy. I show you this to teach the most important lesson. Your mission is not just to survive. Your mission is to question, to verify, to refuse unlawful orders even when refusal costs you. Because the day you stop thinking critically is the day you become a weapon that can be aimed at anyone, including your own people. She lowered her shirt. Never forget that you serve something bigger than any individual officer or corporate interest. You serve each other. And that service demands integrity even when integrity is dangerous. Caldwell attended her first class, watching from the back with satisfaction. Afterward, he approached. "That was good, really good." "Thank you, sir. I'm still figuring out how to teach what I learned the hard way. The best lessons always come from the hard roads." He paused. "How are you doing? Really?" Reagan considered honestly. "Some days are harder. I still have nightmares. The shrapnel still hurts. But I'm not carrying it alone anymore. That makes it bearable." "Good, because there's something I want to discuss." Caldwell handed her a folder. Congress passed the Military Ethics Reform Act last month. Provisions for field operators to halt missions if intelligence appears compromised. Expanded whistleblower protections. Independent oversight of contractor relationships. Reagan opened the folder and read the first page. The legislation's full title made her throat tighten. The Gunnery Sergeant William Ashford Military Accountability Act. "Named after your father," Caldwell said quietly. "I thought he deserved to be remembered as part of this." Reagan's eyes burned, but she refused tears. "He would have been proud. He would have been proud of you. You finished what he started, fighting for people who can't fight for themselves." 6 months later, on a humid afternoon in the Philippines, Reagan stood at the edge of a jungle clearing reclaimed by vegetation. Master Chief Sullivan stood beside her, still limping slightly. Sergeant Colton Graves leaned on a cane, his one remaining eye scanning the tree line. They had returned to where 4 men died. The ambush site was barely recognizable, nature having erased violence with green growth. They planted 4 American flags. Beside each, a simple marker bearing a name. Petty Officer First Class Michael Hendricks, 24. Petty Officer Second Class Patrick Murphy, 28. Petty Officer Second Class Nathan Dalton, 26. Chief Petty Officer Brandon Garrett, 31. Reagan stood at attention and saluted. Sullivan and Graves followed. They held the salute for a full minute. When they lowered their hands, Reagan spoke quietly. "You were sent here to die, but you fought anyway. You trusted that someone would tell your story, that someone would make sure your deaths meant something." She pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling the shrapnel. "I kept that trust. I told your story. And because of what you sacrificed, no one else will be used the way you were. That's my promise. That's my oath." The jungle was silent, but Reagan felt something shift. Not closure exactly. The dead could never return, but perhaps a small measure of peace. Sullivan cleared his throat. "They'd be proud, ma'am." "We all became something because of it," Reagan replied. "Question is whether we become bitter or better." "Which did you choose?" "Better. Definitely better. Because bitter would mean they died for nothing. Better means they died to teach us something important. And I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure that lesson isn't forgotten." They stood for another hour, sharing memories. Hendricks and his terrible jokes, Murphy and his motorcycles, Dalton and his optimism, Garrett and his quiet competence. As the sun began to set, painting the jungle in gold and crimson, they prepared to leave. Reagan took one last look at the 4 flags. "Ready?" Sullivan asked. "Ready." They walked toward extraction, 3 survivors carrying memory's weight, but no longer crushed by it. Behind them, flags stood as silent witnesses to sacrifice and betrayal, and ultimately, justice. Back in the United States, in a military courtroom, Captain Brennan stood as the judge read his sentence. 25 years in military prison. Dishonorable discharge. Forfeiture of all pay and benefits. Reagan sat in the front row, uniform perfect, posture straight. As Brennan was led away in shackles, he looked at her one final time. She met his eyes with absolute calm. No triumph, just the steady gaze of someone who had done what needed doing and would sleep well knowing it. A year after Brennan's conviction, Lieutenant Commander Reagan Ashford stood at the podium in the Naval Academy's main auditorium. 800 midshipmen sat before her, future leaders, eyes fixed on the woman whose story had become legend. "You'll hear a lot about honor in your careers," she began, "about duty and courage and sacrifice, all true and important. But today I want to talk about something else, the courage to question authority when authority is wrong." She unbuttoned her jacket, lifted her shirt to reveal the scars. "These are reminders that the system is not infallible, that good people can do terrible things when profit replaces principle. I carry these every day, two pieces of shrapnel that couldn't be removed. They hurt when storms come. They ache during training. They press against my heart with every breath." The auditorium was silent. I could have had surgery, could have accepted the 50% risk of death to remove them, but I chose to keep them. Because they're not just injuries, they're evidence, they're witnesses, they're proof that 4 men died who shouldn't have, and that someone cared enough to find out why. She lowered her shirt. "You'll face moments where you choose between comfort and conscience, between following orders and doing what's right. Those moments will define you more than any medal. I hope you choose conscience. I hope you ask hard questions even when dangerous, because that's what honor means. Not blind obedience, but thoughtful service guided by principles that don't bend under pressure." The applause that followed was genuine recognition. Afterward, dozens approached with questions. One young woman asked, "Ma'am, do you regret anything?" Reagan thought honestly. "I regret 4 men died before the system failed them. I regret it took 18 months to get justice. But do I regret fighting back? No, never, because silence would have meant their deaths were meaningless. Fighting meant their deaths changed something, and change, even hard-won and incomplete, is always worth the cost." The young woman nodded, something shifting in her expression. Reagan recognized that look, someone deciding what kind of officer they wanted to become. That evening, Caldwell met Reagan for dinner in Annapolis. He had retired 6 months earlier, his last act testifying before Congress about military ethics reform. Now he worked as civilian advisor. "You gave a hell of a speech today," he said, raising his glass. "Learn from the best," Reagan replied, touching her glass to his. They ate in comfortable silence before Caldwell spoke again. "I got a call yesterday. Senator Holloway resigned from Armed Services. Ethics violations related to Orion. Campaign finance irregularities that couldn't be explained. Good, one more piece in place. It's more than that. It's proof the system can work when people push hard enough. You started something, Reagan. A cultural shift in how we think about accountability. That's going to outlive all of us." Reagan pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling the lumps, the shrapnel that had become part of her identity. "I didn't do it alone. Sullivan, Graves, Thornton, you, all the people who refused to look away. True, but you were the catalyst, the one who refused to let it be buried." Caldwell leaned back. "My daughter would have been about your age if she'd lived. I think she would have been like you, stubborn, principled, unwilling to compromise on principles. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you, would have wanted to hear your stories." Reagan smiled. "Tell me about her?" And Caldwell did. For the next hour, he shared stories of the daughter he'd lost. The pain was still there, but joined now by something else. The ability to remember with fondness instead of just grief. It was a skill Reagan was still learning, but she was getting better. 2 years after Brennan's arrest, Commander Reagan Ashford stood in Arlington National Cemetery as Admiral Marcus Caldwell was laid to rest. He had died peacefully in his sleep at 65. Reagan stood at attention in dress uniform, shrapnel aching with the cold November wind. She had been asked to deliver the eulogy. "Admiral Caldwell taught me that rank is not the measure of a warrior. Integrity is. He taught me that following orders is not the same as serving with honor. And he taught me that sometimes the greatest courage is not charging into battle, but standing up and saying, 'This is wrong,' when everyone else wants to pretend everything is fine." She looked at the flag-draped coffin. "He saved my life, not by pulling me from a battlefield, but by believing me when no one else would, by standing beside me when that choice risked everything. He was my commanding officer, my mentor, and in many ways the father I needed when mine was taken. She saluted, holding position as the honor guard fired volleys and a bugler played taps. As the final note faded, she lowered her hand and whispered words only she could hear. "Thank you, sir, for everything." 3 years after the investigation began, Reagan stood in her office at the training facility and looked at the wall dedicated to memory. Photographs of Hendricks and Murphy and Dalton and Garrett smiled back, forever young, forever frozen. Beside their photos hung one of Caldwell in dress whites. On her desk sat the Navy Cross in its case, the medal she had once refused, now a reminder of how far she'd come. Next to it, a wooden box containing 2 extracted shrapnel pieces. She had finally agreed to surgery 6 months ago, once pain became unbearable and technology advanced enough to reduce risk. The surgery succeeded. The shrapnel was gone, but scars remained, and she found she didn't mind. The scars told her story in ways words never could. A knock interrupted her reflection. "Come in." A young SEAL candidate entered, nervous and eager. "Ma'am, I'm reporting for mentorship assignment. They said you'd be my advisor." Reagan gestured to the chair. "Have a seat. What's your name?" "Petty Officer Jackson, ma'am. First name Kyle." "Well, Petty Officer Jackson, before we talk tactics, I want to make sure we're clear on something more important." Reagan stood and moved to the wall of photographs. "See these men? They were my teammates. They died in an ambush that never should have happened. They died because someone in authority valued profit over lives." She turned to face the young SEAL. "My job is to make sure you never end up on a wall like this because someone made a decision that put their interests ahead of yours. So before we talk weapons or tactics or mission planning, I need to know one thing. Are you willing to question orders if those orders don't make sense?" Jackson swallowed. I don't know, ma'am. I was taught to follow chain of command." "Good, that's honest. And following chain of command is important. But there's a difference between following orders and blind obedience. One makes you a professional, the other makes you a tool." Reagan sat. "I'm going to teach you to be a professional. How to think critically. How to recognize when something's wrong and have courage to speak up. You willing to learn that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then let's get started." As Reagan began the first of what would be many sessions with Petty Officer Jackson, she felt purpose settle comfortably across her shoulders. This was her mission now, not pulling triggers or calling airstrikes, teaching the next generation to be warriors with conscience, operators with integrity, leaders who understood that true strength came not from following orders without question, but from having wisdom to know when those orders needed questioning. The shrapnel was gone from her chest, but its lessons remained, carved into her soul as deeply as scars were carved into skin. And she would carry those lessons forward, sharing them with every young warrior who walked through her door, ensuring that Hendricks and Murphy and Dalton and Garrett and Admiral Caldwell had not sacrificed in vain. Their deaths had bought something precious, not medals, not glory, but change. Real, lasting change in how the military thought about ethics and accountability and the value of lives entrusted to its care. And Reagan Ashford would spend the rest of her career protecting that change, nurturing it, ensuring it took root so deeply that future generations would never have to fight the same battles. The war was over, justice had been served, and now came the harder work of building something better from the ashes. She was ready for that work. The shrapnel had made her ready, the scars had made her strong, and the memory of those who had fallen made her determined never to let their sacrifice be forgotten. Commander Reagan Ashford, Navy SEAL, warrior, teacher, and guardian of honor, still standing, still fighting, still refusing to let the system fail those who served it. And that, she knew, was the truest form of heroism there was.